All right, hello everybody. Today is April 26, 2022. It's 1:03 in the afternoon. We're here for Maryland Public Service Commission admin docket number PC54, which is the Montgomery County Community Choice Pilot Work Group. We have on the agenda to discuss a couple of things. We have two submissions, one by staff and one by Potomac Edison, touting the pros and cons. Hang on just a second. Cons. We have two submissions, one by staff and one by Potomac Edison, stating the pros and cons of some of the approaches that we've been discussing. We also have a request to go over the schedule, where we are and where we are moving forward. I would start the meeting by asking if any of the parties have any follow-up based on the data request responses. All right, does any party have any questions based on the data or any further requests for information based on the data request responses we've received? Okay, I'm going to assume that folks have taken a look at the submissions that we're going to discuss today. I have a question from Montgomery County. What, if anything, else does Montgomery County need to know to choose or support one of these options?
This is Stan Edwards. I think we're still trying to understand what the details of the options are as far as cost and feasibility.
Okay, so what specifically, what issues do you need further information on?
Cost. And
okay.
What impact that would have on the CCA.
Judge Grace, this is Lisa Brennan. We haven't received the answers from BGE or PEPCO yet. I just want to make sure that you are aware of that.
Okay. Utilities, when can we expect full answers to the data requests?
This is Bev Sikora. We sent answers out to all but a couple of the questions, and I believe the questions that asked about the costs were answered. Let me see what day that was. We responded to the staff DR. When did I send it?
Oh, Bev,
It was on April the 11th.
Okay. Okay.
Bev, I was talking about the DR that Montgomery County sent that Potomac Edison responded to on with a Excel spreadsheet on the 13th. Sorry, no, wait, that might be wrong. Jeff sent that on the 20th. I thought that's what we were talking about, Judge Grace.
it's my understanding that our answers are, in line, that we're on the same page as, and I don't know that had costs. I mean, it had, let me see if I can find it. Sorry, I've got too much in my inbox.
Bev, are you looking for Potomac Edison's?
Yep.
Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and share that.
So we gave similar answers to the staff data requests and to Montgomery County's data requests with respect to costs. I think we had a little bit more in this spreadsheet that you've just put up now. But it's the answers have not changed in terms of their orders of magnitude. And I think Bev's point is that the answers that the Potomac, that PEPCO and BGE gave to the staff DRs with respect to cost, I'm assuming likewise haven't changed.
Nope, they have not.
So it's the costs of the three options. There's minimal cost to the one that we've been discussing with the county. There's a cost for Potomac Edison of $1 million plus for instant connects. And if I am remembering correctly, the PEPCO and BGE total costs were in the range of $5 million. And then for what staff is describing as $1 million, the cost is at least over $1 million, and depending on all the bells and whistles, could be substantially higher than that. And I don't recall whether BGE and PEPCO did a separate cost for the mirror. And I'll let them speak as to whether they think that would be more, less, or in the same ballpark as the cost for instant connects.
So
Well, and I'll just say, in the conversations we've had more recently, I'm still not convinced, this idea of the instant connect being an option. To me, it's doing instant connect for suppliers doesn't necessarily help us with this situation. So it's kind of got to be, I think, probably as you've explained it, Jeff, on your spreadsheet, it's your process with instant connect. So it's not just okay, you do instant connect and it works for the CCA. It's maybe you can take some aspect of instant connect. Well, and I'm still not even sure that it can, how much else would need to be done to make it to work with the CCA.
Well, your point is well taken, Bev, that if we go with the instant connect option, assuming that is an option on the table, we'd probably also have to build in things from Potomac Edison's option one. Since Potomac Edison's option one is a minimal cost option, I don't see that as materially increasing the costs of option two. It may increase the complexity of it, but I could be wrong because, again, I'm not an IT person. Anyway, I'm hoping that with the two sets of responses out there, the ones from the Exelon companies that were to the staff and the ones from Potomac Edison to Montgomery County's specific question, with which is consistent with, but amplifies on our responses to the staff, that the county's question, which was, how much is this going to cost and what are the advantages and disadvantages, has been addressed. That said, if, you know, I'm where you were earlier, Judge Grace, if the county wants or needs anything more, we're here to try to provide it.
So I'm hoping that you see shared now a response from BGE that they sent to staff's DRs on April the 11th. And this is DR question 18. They provided cost information for seamless moves for BGE and PHI. And we just took a look at Potomac Edison's latest information sharing. So Montgomery County, what other information are you looking for about cost?
Okay, so Judge Grace, this is Stan again. If this is the cost information we're getting, my understanding is staff had questions, and there was a meeting last week about these costs to try to break this down into more detail. If these are the costs that we have, and this is the best they're going to be, then perhaps the question has been answered. But I thought there were still questions that staff had about why some of these things are costing what they're costing. And I don't know, I've not been involved in any kind of work before the Public Service Commission where costs are laid out in more detail and justifications of costs. But if this is the level that's provided, then I guess we do have our answer.
So all of these, Stan, are estimates. So yeah, this is how we tend to approach estimates. And with respect to your initial point, which was, were there meetings with staff? Yes, there were multiple. I kind of lost count, but there were at least 2, possibly 3 meetings with staff in the utilities and some other parties in some of those meetings between the last work group meeting and this work group meeting. And we were asked a lot of questions by staff, and we gave a lot of answers. Our position and the reasons for the position, including costs, have not changed as a result of those multiple meetings.
Okay. So moving off the cost issue, there are some other differences between these, and I wanted to hear from Montgomery County to know if you all had made decisions about, I know that you want to enroll folks as soon as possible, but do you want an option where you contact the folks, the new customers, or are you looking for something where, like, does some amount of time on SOS, does that pose a problem with regards to that end of these proposals? Has Montgomery County made any decisions?
I don't think time on SOS is a deal breaker, I'll call it. So if that's an option that proves to be implementable and cost effective, then I think we can work with that. I guess I'm interested in also in hearing from staff on this.
We'll get there.
Okay. I mean, but part of our decision making, I think, is based on advice from staff on things like, I mean, I'm seeing costs for seamless moves and instant connects, and how does this relate to the CCA as opposed to retail suppliers, for example? I mean, is the CCA bearing all the cost of this, or?
Okay. Staff.
Judge Grace, I appreciate the question. And for Stan, that's a fair question as to, you're seeing numbers being presented. We have a feel for the amount of total cost that the PHI folks and the BG&E folks provided on BG&E. I think in the DR they quoted, they gave us some figures that reflect about 20,000 hours of labor and various labor costs. So we have some sort of high level numbers that would, and I think there's a breakdown into some of there's the design portion, the build, the testing, and a couple other things. So there's probably some additional detail that one would need in order to figure out how much of this cost, this development cost, is something that would be reflected in charges or some form of cost recovery for the CCA. And I don't think we're at the point where we can give the county that number just yet. So Stan, if you're in, you don't actually have you've got the seamless move costs for that PHI and BG told us about. And then I think Jeff provided what looks like a pretty high level estimate of cost for each of the three options. So you don't really have cost estimates from the other utilities on those three options. I think maybe what we're hearing is that we have a general expectation that the cost to implement either the mirror approach, which is exchanging the default SOS for a default CCA, a form of instant connect, those would have similar costs to the seamless move development. So, from a standpoint of if the county is sort of looking for specifics, I think we probably need to drill into those options a little bit further and identify what is recoverable and the means by which it's recovered through charges that would, impact the CCA customers. So I don't think we're quite at that level of detail yet, Stan. I think I certainly wouldn't be able to make a recommendation on which way to go here and be able to specify how much of this is going to impact the county. Now, one of the things that we have also sort of concurrently developed, I think that spreadsheet went around, is the scale of the PEPCO deployment is such that even if there was a multiple $1,000,000 expense associated with doing this, over the body of customers and the amount of revenue, if we used a POR kind of approach, the development costs, even if they were at the full non-incremental cost here, that looks like it's recoverable without a significant impact. So that's something that we would probably want to refine to get some precision and be able to make suggestions about how many customers will be retained on the CCA versus those that switch to retail choice versus those that drop back or choose SOS. So there's still a lot of information that we don't know yet. So Judge Grace, I think we probably need to do this interactively, where we probably want to talk to the county and determine their understanding of how they would need to operate the CCA, including how fast they would be able to enroll customers under some of the different models that are in front of you. I mean, the mirror approach, they enroll right away, but under the other two with seamless move, with instant connect, and with the sweep method that PE's promoting, there are some delays there. I think that we may still have some things we need to understand about precisely how much time things are going to take. And some of that goes to the county in terms of they need to be able to tell us how fast they can react to the information provided to them. So, Stan, I know your folks were not on those technical calls. That was unfortunate because there was some additional sort of discussion of the three different options. Hopefully you did see the information that was circulated about those. So long story short, we sort of need to get a little bit of feedback on from the county so we can sort of figure out which roads we're going to take. We need to understand if retail suppliers especially the ones that have advocated for Instant Connect, because one of the benefits of the Instant Connect approach is some potential cost sharing of that functional, the cost to develop that, assuming the commission allows recovery in a manner that was done for other choice enhancements. That's potential to be shared if that benefits there, and that makes a little bit more sense, or it has a lot more impact on the decision-making process for Potomac Edison and for PG&E, because they don't have the same scale as CCA customers. So, Stan, does that help with what you're looking for? There, you don't have a lot of like granular detail that's going to let you pick out. You need to understand from the county where things stand with your internal process, so that we can get from the county their desires and your capability of how fast you're going to be able to react to new customers enrolling, that sort of thing. We need to sit down with the county and hear from you as well.
I'm not sure, Phil, what you mean by how fast the county will be able to react to new customers joining. Can you explain that a little bit?
Sure. So under the PE method, you're going to get an FTP site upload from the utility on some basis, periodically, either daily, weekly, every couple of days, whatever you decide, how you're going to manage that. The speed at which you're going to react to that is going to impact how long that customer stays on SOS. So if you've worked something out with your retail supplier or your energy services provider, that they will ask for that information every day and then enroll new customers. You basically, new customer moves in, the utility puts it on the FTP site, the county downloads the information and processes that enrollment. So there's like 3 steps there.
Yeah.
If you can do all that in one day and then send the enrollment, and then the utility commits to making that enrollment happen in one day, then that totally minimizes the SOS time. But right now, there's some questions, at least in my mind, as to how fast the county will be able to perform under those circumstances.
Yeah,
So
okay.
that's the type of thing we need your folks to sit down and think about. And that can impact some of those costs. Under the other two, there's some similar types of decisions that we need to understand.
Okay.
So maybe we need to sit down with your folks and have a technical call and walk through some of the options and have that discussion.
Okay.
Can I just, on the issue of costs, I agree that the speed at which things are done could impact things for the CCA with respect to the CCA's costs. The cost information that we provided are just the utilities costs.
Yeah.
Those will not change depending on this timing issue that Mr. Vander Hayden was just talking about. And our position is that all of those costs are recoverable. And if they're costs that we're incurring to do something solely for the CCA, then the appropriate rate making is for the CCA to bear those costs. If it is something that we are doing for the benefit of all retail suppliers, like Instant Connects, which the commission has previously rejected, but if we're going to go back to the commission with Instant Connects again, hoping for a different outcome, then the issue of what something that's being done not solely or even primarily for the county, how those costs should be recovered from, for example, all retail suppliers. That's something that we would need to address.
Yeah.
But the costs don't change.
Right.
The
So
costs are all recoverable.
So Jeff, you're talking about, there's some intricacies of regulatory cost recovery in terms of what is capitalized cost, what is O&M expense, what is incremental versus what's already recovered in rate. So there's a lot of different positions amongst the cost recovery that we have to address. right now.
All of
there's-
this is incremental.
Are you
And,
sure?
yep, all of it is incremental
How do you know that? Wouldn't we have
because
to
that's the
investigate that?
basis for our estimate. What new different things do we have to do?
So any new labor is incremental in your view?
Yes.
Okay.
So we're gonna have to put aside the issue of cost recovery at this time. Montgomery County is probably not gonna have the benefit of knowing whether they're gonna be 100% reliable for these costs or whether they're gonna be shared with, others. That's not something that we can discuss right now. We just don't have the information necessary to do that. There are two hands raised, Bev and Lori. Bev, do you want to go first?
Sure. I want to remind people that we're spending a lot of time and potentially a lot of money on, not that there's an insignificant number of customers that move in and out of Montgomery County, but it's just, we have got so many other things to deal with to implement CCA that I'm getting concerned that, trying to get the perfect instead of, hey, what we can do quickly and, relatively inexpensively, so that we can move on and deal with the rest of the stuff that we need to deal with to get this going. I get that, it would be great that, if we could do the mirror thing, but you know what, that's going to take a heck of a long time and it's going to cost a lot of money. So why do we keep, throwing it out there as an option? I know that Montgomery County wants to have the best information possible, but, we just seem to be talking about the same stuff over and over again. We've said that, the proposal that Montgomery County and Potomac Edison came up with and seemed to be, a good compromise that everyone was on board with. Instead we've now tried to find other things and this is a huge undertaking and we need to get past this. In all the things that we have to do, this is not the biggest issue. And it's just, I know you're trying to figure out a way to keep the supplier, to do something that will, make the suppliers happy too. But, that's just a bigger fish than we have time to fry at this point.
Bev, I share your concern with the timeline. We always hope to get a consensus on most of the issues, but as I'm writing my report, we're very close to the deadline where we're going to have to provide the commission with 1 or 2 or 3 options and state who is in favor of which option and leave it up to the commission. So, you're correct. We do need to wrap up our discussion on this issue soon. Lori, did you have something to say? And I see Stan, I see you have your hand raised. I'll get to you.
Yes, thank you, Judge Grace. And Bev, you were kind of heading down the same road that I am. That just to remind folks that I keep thinking about this is a pilot for 7 years for one county. And these options that we're discussing are for a small percentage of the overall customer base that is the one that starts new accounts once the CCA is underway. Also, Montgomery County is perhaps unique in the state that within one county you have 3 different utilities. So, Montgomery County is staring down an $11 million tab potentially for only a percentage of customers that move in. So I'm just trying to see it in context that given that it's a pilot, it's one county that unfortunate county has 3 different utilities that we not let the perfect be the enemy of the good. And then finally, my question to the Public Service Commission is if you could clarify how this conversation needs to be reflected in the regulations, because there is sort of the hypothetical of, are you writing the regulations that are sufficiently flexible that should in the future another county wish to implement a pilot, and they could be in one of the same 3 utilities jurisdictions, how would those costs be allocated? So I'm just sort of wondering, can the regs be general enough that would allow the implementation of option 3 for the Montgomery County pilot? And yet, as if Instant Connect gets implemented in the future and another county comes on, you wouldn't have to rewrite the regulations to be able to take advantage of Instant Connect and apportion whatever marginal cost or incremental cost needs to be assessed to enable that Instant Connect functionality for a CCA, either Montgomery County or another county.
So Lori, good question, and I'm taking notes, but I'm gonna kind of hope that you'll help me at the point where we're discussing regs, earmark this issue so that we can make sure that we address it. Staff, do you have a response?
Judge Grace, I think, since the technical details of the implementation probably do not need to be part of the regulations themselves. We have, some guidance, the law sort of indicates a couple of fairly detailed items about what happens under enrollment. So it's potentially something that could be easily handled as part of the tariff if there's some specific, this is not applicable to the entire state. It's just sort of 3 utilities. So if you draft regs, that are applicable to all utilities, it's probably not as necessary. I mean, I would defer to the lawyers on that one, but I think if we're going to get into specifics as to how this is all going to work with timing and things of that nature, we could potentially use tariffs to get the detail we need and the flexibility to make changes later.
Bev, I see your hand raised, but we're gonna wait and hear from Stan first. Go ahead, Stan.
Thank you. I just want to respond to a couple things. One, Montgomery County worked with PE on this option about the sweep enrollment. I believe we're comfortable with that approach. Staff was interested in exploring, and Phil, please correct me if I'm wrong, but staff was interested in exploring some of these other options. And so we were anticipating having more detail, and I understand there've been some numbers given, but again, I don't know the process of how detailed these numbers have to be. I mean, somebody mentioned 20,000 hours of work, which is 10 people working for a full year. Maybe it is that. I don't know enough about the utilities processes and inner workings of these systems, but that is a significant amount of staff time. And if that's what it is, that's what it is. So I'm a little frustrated that the county's being asked to say, okay, make a decision. You've got information on one thing that's going to be relatively inexpensive, according to our discussions with PE, which were very fruitful discussions. And then we've got these other costs, which are a little bit unclear to me. And I thought staff was also suggesting they need some more detail there. If this is all we're going to get, that's fine. That's all we're going to get. And I think we can move forward with the what's called the PE/MC enrollment process. But I am a little frustrated that it seems like we're being asked to make decisions when staff is saying, I think there's still some unanswered questions here.
So please don't feel singled out, Montgomery County. I think we're all at the point where we're going to be needing to weigh in on which of these options we support. There is some more ironing out that we have to do, but we can't stay on this for another month. So Bev, what did you have to say?
I was just going to go back to the idea of the regulations and say, unfortunately, sometimes, you have to draft the regulations to deal with what you have. And then if we have to make changes for a bigger implementation, we'll just have to come back, and change the regulations that, that's, I don't think that's, we'd like to avoid that, but it's not the worst thing in the world. And just getting back to this, whole thing, taking, coming up with a detailed cost estimate is not an easy undertaking, especially with some of these options where, it's going to have major trickle down impacts, like the mirror option, that one especially, it is just, that's a fundamental change to our system that our programmers are already saying, hey, we have not sat down and tried to figure out every last detail of what this is going to impact. But, based on their expertise and, their knowledge of our systems, they're confident that it would cost, and these are the same people that are doing something like the seamless moves, they're confident that it's going to cost significantly more. This kind of middle ground, the instant connect of what, it kind of was being thought of for suppliers. Again, that, same thing, same people are working on it that are doing the seamless moves. It would cost as much as seamless moves, but probably even more because, again, the instant connect that has been kind of envisioned for suppliers is not going to necessarily accommodate the CCA without a decent amount of additional work. So, it's kind of an order of magnitude that we're trying to do without wasting a lot of people's time, spending, hours coming up with a detailed analysis of, okay, because I'm changing this, I'm going to have to change these other 3 systems. I mean, again, we're just trying to give order of magnitude so that people have some information, but, that we're not, wasting too much of people's time.
So Bev, I don't know if you were there for the technical call last week, but I think one of the things we learned from your folks was that they had the expectation that implementing that the mirror approach, which, we got a little bit into the details of how that would work, was consistent with the amount of labor that was associated with the development of seamless move.
I didn't hear that, Phil.
Did
I
not
heard
hear
that it would be, I heard that it would be more.
We did not, well, I mean, it's sort of kind of difficult, you might imagine, to sort of make that estimate without understanding what's being done, but
No, Phil, our
as
people
part of-
can, because they're intimately familiar with their systems and they can,
I mean, would it help if we put some questions in writing and got?
no, Phil,
about
because
it?
we've spent enough time on this that I guess I'm tired of having to, like, why don't you just trust our people that, hey, this is what they do for a living, this is what they say.
It's not about trust, Bev. and
Yes,
you
it
know
is,
that.
Phil, because
It
we're
is.
at a
It
point
is
where
not.
we're walking through everything in excruciating detail. And again, you're saying that you heard that, oh, it wouldn't be any more. No, I was on that call too. And it was clearly said that it would be more work. So,
I heard that it was the
well,
two what was proposed would be more or less compatible with.
then you were on a different call than I was, Phil.
All right,
We
well,
must have been on different.
again, this is why we should probably solve these issues by putting things in writing and asking the questions. I mean, if we're going to come down to a disagreement on what everything costs, then, probably the best way to do it would be to sort that out. Now,
But
that's
then,
really up to-
then who's going to pay for the time that our people are wasting spending the next week trying to come up with the cost estimate when, first of all, we're not even really sure what we're doing with all of this. Give us, they keep asking us, well, if you want a really detailed cost estimate, I need a much more detailed explanation of what everything is going to happen. So then not only, we're going to have to sit down and say, okay, well, if this is going to happen, then this is going to happen, then this is going to happen, this is going to happen. So, we might as well kiss the deadline goodbye for, getting this up and running.
Your
We're
folks
gonna have to-
implemented seamless move in 6 months. I mean, I didn't hear that it would take, we were told it was on the order of the same scale. I mean, I don't know. I really don't understand. I guess you're saying just trust us, this is too expensive.
No,
Walk
it's
away.
not a matter of just trust us. We've had like 2 or 3 calls where we've walked through this stuff with you, short of just saying, Phil, here's our system. You go in there and you figure it out and you come up with an estimate of yours of our own. I don't know. I've never been part of a discussion about a system change where we've had to go into such excruciating detail about what exactly was going to be required or what we were going to do to get staff comfortable with it. I've been doing this for as long as you have, and this is a new one for me.
My recollection is when POR was first developed, 10, 12 years ago, we had to get into this level of discussion because the cost that was going to be reflected in the discount rates was very important to the retail suppliers, and we need to know how much it was going to be. We also had to understand.
I don't remember having to bring our programmers on the phone calls and walk you through exactly what they were going to do.
You do have to understand, it's like there's an information asymmetry. Your folks have all the information. So we need to be able to develop independent opinions on things. And so we have to ask these questions.
Okay, I think we all recognize, anyone who's worked in this industry recognizes that utility system changes are very expensive. I think at this point, we've been given cost information from the utilities based on these general ideas of what we would like to see going forward. And the cost information provided by the utilities, we have not just one, has been consistent and is consistent across utilities. So I think we have to rely on what we have at this point, and we have to look at what the pros and cons are of each of these options, but including in that the cost that we have, the cost information that we have at this point. So I think, staff is saying that they need more information. I'd like to know what more information staff needs, or when staff is going to be ready to decide which of these approaches it's endorsing.
Well, Your Honor, I think what we might want to do is put together some specific questions to try to make sure that we're all on the same page. Is that reasonable?
Well, it depends.
So right now
we've been on this issue, this small issue of folks who are going to be moving after the initial start date. We've been on this small issue for many, many weeks. And we've had DRs from more than one party, and we've had responses, and we've had full group meetings, and we've had side meetings, and asking for the utilities to spend umpteen more hours and for their employees to spend umpteen more hours to come up with very specific answers to specific data requests. That's not been done up until this point, and we're late in the game. In addition, this is not the type of, this is a working group and we're supposed to be working together. And yes, we should challenge each other's ideas, but digging in and challenging each other's data responses and positions is really not, it's just going to mire us down. So can you discuss what issues specifically, can we discuss on this phone call what issues specifically staff needs more information on?
So I guess, we have a general feel for what the functionality of the 3 options we've got, what it looks like. And I haven't heard a lot of, discussion about whether or not that's accurate or not. So I think we understand that. We probably can see if folks have questions about the statements made and the various pros and cons. So timing of each of the methods is probably something we need to have a good answer on. I think there are some assumptions that need to happen in order to make the various options happen on the scale or the amount of time needed. So we should know how long each method is going to take, because that really gets to how long customers end up on SOS, which then gets to how many customers in Montgomery County need to be taken care of, on a sort of ongoing basis in the SOS bidding process, because that's something we're going to need to take up this summer. That issue got raised, I think, by OPC. And then
Okay, wait, stop. Stop for 1 second. I have a question.
Yes.
So you're saying that this decision on this issue, in order to make a decision on that, you need to know about how many customers move in and out of Montgomery County in a given month?
Yeah, we've asked for that.
Okay,
That's one of the two.
And it's been
questions.
provided.
It has not been provided by BG and PEPCO. That's question 1 and 2, I think, have not been covered, and question 21 in the DRs not been responded to yet. But,
okay, but
PEPCO
that's I understand that question and that answer, but why is that answer necessary for this issue, specific issue that we've been discussing?
you need to know how many customers are going to be on standard offer service in Montgomery County
For this issue?
for how long. So you have to understand whether or not that's going to be an issue in terms of serving that load.
But isn't that an issue? Isn't that something that we need to know before the next PIP? And not necessarily a part of this working group?
I think that the choice you make may influence whether or not it's 0 or if it's some number that reflects the churn rate on a monthly basis.
But the number of customers that it churn, and I have the data for BG and PEPCO, I'll send it shortly. It's not, it's a blip. And so if it's a blip of customers, especially when you consider that it's not happening like all of them at the same time, you might have a handful, on SOS for a couple days, another handful of different, it's.
Well, it hasn't been provided, so we don't know of that. We understand that the churn rate in PEPCO is 10,000 customers a month. That seems like it might be substantial.
I think if it was.
The sooner that's provided, we can probably come to an
PEPCO,
agreement
they
about
would
what
have
that would
raised
look like.
it as an issue. So if PEPCO had a concern about the PE proposal from an SOS standpoint, I'm pretty sure they would have said, hey, this is problematic, but we'll get you the data so you can double check us.
Okay, thank you, Bev. Okay, so I interrupted you, Phil, and I'm sorry, but I had to get that question while it was still in my mind. Go ahead. You were talking about some of the other issues that staff needs more clarification on.
Sure. So the timing of how each of these methods is going to work is important. And I think the other thing we need to understand is ultimately what it's going to cost. And we don't have cost estimates from BG&E or PHI unless the company is saying it's roughly the same as what it's going to be for seamless move. PE has provided an estimate it was about $1 million. And then we need to be able to express how much of that is going to be recoverable such that it's going to impact the cost of the CCA service. I think with that information, I think all the parties, including the county, should be able to determine whether or not the cost of the option is cost beneficial relative to the benefit it provides.
Bill Fields, you have your hand up, and then Lily.
Thanks. Yeah, Bill Fields with OPC. I actually had a question on that churn rate data. I just wanted to make sure I was understanding correctly. Does that include customers who move within the PEPCO service territory? I couldn't remember if, when a customer moves within the service territory, if they get a new account number and if they would be included in that, or if that's just customers who are coming from outside the service territory.
This is Robbie for PHI. They're assigned a new account number when they move to a new location.
So the churn rate you gave would include customers moving like from one apartment in Montgomery County to another?
Correct.
Okay. Thanks.
You're welcome.
Lily Hawkins?
Sorry about that. Yeah, my question is actually related to the timeline, and maybe we're going to cover this later, but a few minutes ago, you mentioned that we're running out of time, and I'm curious what the date you had in mind is and what the deadline that we're trying to, what the landmark is.
Well, I mean, we have the deadlines given to us by the statute, which I don't have in front of me right now. But the regs and the report and other things need to be to the commission several months prior to that in order to meet the timeline. While we're talking about this issue, I'll see if I can find in my folder for this matter, like a draft timeline that I have from the past, but I'll get back to you on that answer.
Okay, yeah, I just wanted to make sure there wasn't like another, earlier we had been talking about auctions that were coming up and different deadlines. So I just want to make sure that we were all clear on what those are. Thanks.
Oh, for that, that's what we're talking about. That's the PIP process, and that's what we went over.
Right. I just wanted to make sure there wasn't another interim deadline similar to that I wasn't aware of. That's all.
So at least one of the utilities has PIP several times a year, and some of the other utilities have it once or twice a year. But I believe, Jeff, yours is coming up. Is it in June?
So, Your Honor, the way it works is we design the bid process for an entire 12-month period. It tends to run from October to June. And we have several auctions. Each utility has several auctions during that 12-month period. The PIP is held, the PIP stands for Procurement Improvement Process. And the PIP is held every year in the summer, and that's when we tweak the procurement process. That's when we set the schedule for the next October to June bid period. And then we, in August or September, we submit that to the commission, and the commission generally approves what we submit, and then we start doing the bidding in October. So different companies are on slightly different bid cycles within that annual cycle, but everybody does the PIP all at once. And so we are going to have our first meeting this year at the end of May. Staff just scheduled it. And that's when we are going to design the bidding that will commence in October of 2021. And for some utilities could go could be procuring multi-year contracts between October of 2022, between October of 22 and June of 23. And so you can see why, if you're going to procure a 2-year contract sometime in early to mid 2023, how that will overlap with a fall of 2024 start date. In other words, we have to, in this upcoming summer PIP process, figure out how we're going to overlap the bid cycle for the next several years with the startup of the CCA. What was different for Potomac Edison was that we had contracts that were going to be bid this April and June that would have potentially overlapped with the projected start date for the CCA, but we in the commission and the suppliers and the other stakeholders, including staff and OPC, solve that problem by just shortening those contracts before we put them out the bid. So right now, everybody's in the same boat, and that boat is going to get designed and built and christened and launched between the May meeting and in October when we do the first bids for the next cycle.
Okay, thanks, Jeff. David Hoppick.
So thank you, Judge Grace. I think there are two issues I'd like to raise related to the pros and cons that we brought up in ours. Do you want me to go through one, mention them both, or mention one, get reactions, and then move to the second one?
Whatever you want.
Okay, so I'll start with the first, obviously. So in the current PE Montgomery County proposal, where the data is posted to the FTP site, there's kind of two scenarios. There's the seamless move scenario, and then the scenario where customers are more or less new to the service territory with some additional twists on that. And it talks about a seamless move of existing SOS within Montgomery County. So for example, if somebody's already in PEPCO, they already made a decision to be on SOS, and then they move within PEPCO within Montgomery County. My understanding is that their SOS would be seamlessly moved. I'd like to understand how that will actually work, because seamless move is the move of an existing retail supply. And is this going to create kind of technical cost issues? So let me start with that one.
Can I ask a question about your question? Are we saying this is an existing SOS customer who has affirmatively opted out?
Yeah, that's the presumption. So someone's already in Montgomery County, PEPCO, they move.
They've received notice and opted out of the CCA and are on SOS, and then they move.
Yes, so
Okay, that's all.
our understanding of the current proposal is those customers are quote unquote seamlessly moved. So yes, how does that work?
Jeff, do you want to take this one?
Okay, so I will try to explain it in my simple-minded, non-technical way, and then the subject matter experts will correct me when I mess this up. So your scenario is somebody lives in Montgomery County. They have affirmatively opted out of the CCA, and they want to move to somewhere else in the same utilities service territory in Montgomery County. And you're calling that a seamless move, but it isn't a seamless move. It's just they move their SOS and they stay on SOS, and we don't need to tell the county that they're moving because they've already opted out. So they don't get put into the FTP, they don't get put into the seamless move process. They just stay on SOS unless, of course, they switch to a retail supplier or they affirmatively change their option and want to be a CCA customer. And in either of those cases, they're a new enrollment. So there is no process that needs to be invented or modified for that scenario. And to the extent that staff hypothesize that as being a con to the simple approach, staff was seeing problems that simply don't exist. Now, I'm going to step back and let my subject matter experts tell me how I screwed that up, or confirm that I didn't.
Jeff, it's Valerie. No, I think you did. I think you did just fine.
Valerie, does PE assign a new account number to folks who move?
We do.
Okay,
Yep.
so, and I think some of the other utilities do as well. So the other utilities, is your answer similar to that of PE?
Yes, it is. This is Robbie for PHI.
Yes,
Okay.
it is. Ashish from BG&E. Thanks.
Okay, thank you both. David Hoppick?
Yeah, can I respond to that? So, like, I understand what you said the process would be. And I think, Jeff, we were more characterizing it in pros and cons as, I guess, we didn't totally understand how this would work, and we need to think a bit through it, but that's helpful. So if there's nothing put on the FTP site, the county doesn't know this customer exists at this address. And I understand that previously, the county has in theory already reached out to this customer. The customer's already said, no, I want SOS. But is the county thinking of, multiple rounds of communication? For example, we have a new supplier we've contracted with, your rates changing to this, updates over time. Is there a reaction to the county to essentially the customer being somewhat invisible?
So David, real fast, this is Robbie. How are you all tracking the customers that opt off the list initially? Would you do it by their name or some kind of other identification so that if they did move, you would say, oh, this customer's already opted off, we shouldn't contact them again?
So are you speaking about the initial enrollment in the very beginning?
So if it correct, so they say they opted out and then they move within Montgomery County to a new address. It's the same name, I would assume, on the account. Would you all have any kind of identifying information so that you would know not to reach out to them again, since they've already opted off once? Or would you do it every time they move?
I think that gets at the question I was posing for the county. So, presumably with the initial enrollment, there's going to be a record, this customer with this name at this address told us, no, they want SOS. So we're not going to enroll that customer. And then that customer moves, and it was just described as, okay, well, we already were told these customers don't want the CCA. So we're not going to post any data to the FTP. So if the county does have additional information that they want to share with this customer, that they kind of don't know the customer's there, I would think another option would be, the customer is just transferred to the new site, they're defaulted to SOS as exists now, and then the FTP is posted to, but there's something that clearly delineates, hey, these customers previously selected SOS, do not enroll these customers unless they affirmatively say, hey, now I do want the CCA.
So,
But again, I think that gets back to a question for the county.
all right, so this is Jeff, and I'm not speaking for the county here, but if the county told us that they wanted to know about customers who were on SOS because they opted out and they've changed addresses, and they wanted to know that so that potentially at some future time, they could reach out to those folks and ask them if they've changed their mind about the CCA. You are right that we could add a field to the FTP that provided that information, or we could give them a separate list of moves. I would think that you would need the list of people moving within the county who've already opted out even less free. Staff keeps calling our method a sweep, and it's not. But you really could do that through a periodic, a monthly or quarterly sweep of people who've moved, and And that would not be a difficult or expensive thing to do. But again, that's what the county wants the CCA to have. We would be able to accommodate them. I'm speaking now for PE, but I would imagine that the challenge and the effort would be comparable for our peers at the other utilities. So basically, we can do what the county wants with respect to that, and I don't see that materially changing the complexity or the costs.
And this is Stan. I think Montgomery County would intend to reach out to customers periodically. I don't know how frequently that would be, but what Jeff suggests, I think, would satisfy that need.
This is Fran Francis. Can I just, in terms of a question, I understand with these people moving, it seems that the discussion is centered around residential customers. However, I would like to raise something in this category. Obviously, commercial customers don't move. In other words, they're not frequently moving like residential customers do. Small office buildings, small accounts in an office building, small accounts in an apartment building. But what they do change frequently are management companies. And in that case, hypothetically, you have a management company that's managing a small apartment building somewhere in Montgomery County, and they switch management companies. They switch management companies to another company in Montgomery County, or maybe they switch management companies to someone in Prince George's County or the District of Columbia. The account numbers don't change when you're not switching the owner. That's my understanding, and the utilities can all jump all over me if I'm wrong. That is just a change of address form. And we would like to be careful that that change of address form doesn't trigger something for a small commercial customer that has started off not being picked up by the CCA because they have a competitive contract, or having opted out of the CCA because they're on SOS. We don't want anything triggered, so there's a flood of new emails or something happens behind the scenes that this change of address has triggered something with the CCA. So that's the problem I'm trying to prevent. How do I do that?
So Fran, this is Robbie. You are correct. A simple change of address, just changing where the bill is mailed to, that would not trigger a change of account. So to close out an account, to open a new account. So that part would not be affected by this process. So the account number would never change. The name wouldn't change on the account. This wouldn't trigger anything to Montgomery County for a simple change of address.
Okay, so this doesn't fit into what we're now discussing, or we've been previously discussing for residential customers when someone moves within the county. That's
Correct.
what I'm trying to prevent.
Yeah, the account has to be closed and open somewhere else completely, not just a change of address.
Okay, thank you, Robbie.
You're welcome.
David, I'm going to return to you, but Phil has his hand raised.
Just quickly. So in G3 on page 10 of the document with the legislation, just want to make sure we're all in agreement, or maybe we aren't. But it says on applying for new electric service, that's when the customer has to either contact the utility or sign up with the retail supplier. So if a customer is already in the county and they're moving to another location within that county in the same service territory, are they getting a new account number, and does that correspond to the definition or the words in the law that says on applying for new electric service? So does new electric service in G3, where it again talks about, the default decision has to be applied there, is the new account equal to a new electric service, or how are folks interpreting that? And I really want to understand how the county interprets G3.
I'm sorry, I did not have that document up, so if you can give me a minute and come back to me, I'll take a look at it, but I don't know that we've actually looked at that sentence compared to this discussion.
I think what we're sort of circling around here is if the customer establishes a new account, that's when the deemed permission is granted. And, you know, we I think easily addressed how that would work when this got started. And now we're talking about a customer that is establishing a new, there it is. I'm applying for new service right down at the bottom. That's kind of what I'm asking. So Lisa, if your folks haven't thought about that, I'm happy to wait for that answer.
So
Well, the language is if they're applying for new service, and what the utilities are saying, it's not new service for a commercial customer who's just changing an address. That seems obvious. If I'm understanding what Fran was describing as the situation.
Yeah, the care of address change, correct?
So that's just an account address change. So Phil, is your question whether a customer moving from an apartment or a house in Montgomery County to another house or apartment in Montgomery County, if that's considered new service?
Yeah, if a business or a residential customer is moving to a new service location, not changing the mailing address on the account. I think Fran was asking about changing the mailing address on the account. I'm assuming one does not move a apartment building to a new location. So I think that's what, so I think I understood where she was coming from on that perfectly.
That's correct. That's correct.
Okay.
Great. So what I'm, Dave's original kind of question was sort of addressing what is the issue when a customer that has previously selected SOS and opted out of the CCA, when they establish a new service location, is that equal to applying for new electric service or not? And I was looking for
So
like, I think the
so
county-
this is-
look at Roman
the
2.
county's position on that is sort of important to the way we're looking at this as well.
We discussed this at a prior meeting, and look at Roman 2. The customer is applying for new service, and that's treated as new service for purposes of enrollment in the CCA, unless the customer's contracted with a retail supplier or contacted an electric company to select standard offer service, which we all agreed in a prior discussion was they've opted out of the CCA. So it's exactly the scenario that we were talking about 8 or 10 minutes ago. I will add that if number 3 Roman 2 didn't exist, and you were going to read the statute as saying that you have to put people into the CCA every time, or have them opt out of the CCA every time they change their address, then that's even simpler. Then we don't have to do this periodic sweep of people who are on SOS who've transferred and send it to the county for them to send follow-up communications to the extent that Fran is going to permit that to happen, because they just run through the normal process. But as we discussed, number 3 has 2 carve-outs, and the second carve-out is they've opted out of the CCA in favor of SOS.
So Jeff, does that mean they don't have to opt out twice, is what you're saying effectively?
That was the discussion that we had previously, and that to me as an attorney makes sense reading the statute.
So Jeff, your position is that moving to a new service location does not constitute new electric service if you were previously a customer of the same utility.
It does constitute new electric service for the purposes of this clause, but then you have it unless. So they're applying for new electric service as this within whatever this is intended to mean, But they don't get counted for purposes of the CCA if Roman 1 or Roman 2 apply.
Okay, how does Roman 2 apply?
If for shorthand, you want to say that means they're not applying for new electric service, I suppose from a practical standpoint that's accurate. It's just not how you parse statutes.
Help me out on that one more time, if you would, Jeff. So when they contact the electric company to move, you're saying that is the 3 Roman numeral 2 contact?
No, it's when they've already they've already selected, they've already opted out. They opted out at their first address, and then they call to move to a second address. They don't have to opt out again.
The statute, what the statute says is everyone is a mineral unless they are an animal or a vegetable.
So
Everyone is CCA
that,
unless-
how does that work with that is that implicating the seamless move there with item 1?
No, because in seamless move, no. In item 3, Roman 1 is seamless moves, and it means that the seamless move does not get disrupted.
All right, so the way Judge Grace, you're interpreting this and is consistent with Jeff's interpretation is that the language for new electric service does not apply if a customer has been a previous customer. I'm just trying to understand how we're make sure there's sort of no dispute as to how this language gets applied, because it does have implications if when you move to a new service location, if you are considering to be new electric service. That's why Mr. Hoppick was raising the issue as to what happens under a move when the customer has previously selected. And I guess what I'm hearing is that folks are interpreting this as the customer, once they make that determination at a previous location, if the same person, same name person applies for service at a new location, then that is essentially binding, and they don't have the opportunity to default to the CCA unless they take action to do so, which sounds fine, although it may imply that over time, and this is where it's helpful to understand how many folks are turning within each service territory inside the county.
I'm glad you brought that up, Phil.
Will it have an impact on the amount of customers that are retained on the CCA, throughout the course of the pilot? So.
I'm glad you brought that up, Phil. Did you see that you got an email from Bev with answers to your DRs from Pepco and BGE? So the answer is, question 1, please provide the average number of move-ins per month in Montgomery County, inclusive of existing customers for residential and type 1 rate classes. The answer, the 2021 average for BGE was 282 per month. And there's an attachment 1. It's a Excel spreadsheet from Pepco. The average monthly change for residential is 180, and for type 1 non-residential is 4. Bev, I'm assuming that is, like Robbie said earlier, that also includes folks moving from one location to another within Montgomery County. Is that right?
That is correct.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, sorry.
Yep, that's correct.
I was gonna say, you gotta ask Robbie and Ashish that. I'm just a conduit.
Okay, thanks, guys. So Phil, I think that question has been answered for staff. Is that a sufficient answer? Okay, we'll go back to that. Bill and Lori. Bill first. You have your hands raised. Bill Fields.
Yeah, thanks. Well, I got distracted by looking at these numbers to try to understand how this goes together with the 10,000 a month. But maybe it'll become clear to me when I get more of a chance to look at it. I raised my hand when we were talking about this G3 language. It's not it's not the clearest, but I think it does. I mean, my take on it is that the customer has elected, that election is supposed to continue when the customer applies for new service somewhere else. I mean, new service at a different address. Now, it has to be the same customer, not just, from the same household. And it's interesting, actually, G3.2 says contacted an electric company to select standard offer service. So I would read that as, if somebody opted out in PE service territory, and then they moved to PEPCO within Montgomery County, I would read that as saying that, they already opted out. I'm sure that would be a tremendous calculation, but not sure how else to read it where it says an electric company.
To staff council, Kenny and Peter, do you have any alternate, or is your position that there's an alternate interpretation of this portion?
This is Peter. I was having trouble unmuting. No, I don't have an alternate. I think between Jeff and Bill Fields, I think the problem was on understanding exactly whether there was a new account or whether a new account was new service or not. But given what I've heard, I think Jeff and Bill are correct.
Okay, thank you, Peter. Before I get back to you, your other questions, David Hoppick, Lori McGilvray has her hand raised.
So I'm just wondering if someone can clarify if there's actually a data set of customers who have opted out, or whether it's a default logic that if you have an existing MoCo customer who's on SOS, who changes address and starts electric service at a new address, that it's default logic. If they're on SOS, they must have opted out, therefore they'll stay on SOS. So I'm wondering if there's like affirmative data, like, Jane Smith opted out, she's on SOS, so we don't need to ask her. Are you checking Jane Smith, or is there just a default logic? Anybody named anybody who's on SOS and MoCo and they move, they must have opted out. So that's the first part of my question. And then the second part is, just maybe from a documentation, double checking standpoint, it would seem pretty straightforward to just basically say, and we'd like to confirm that you are opting out of the CCA and therefore want to stay on SOS. That it's just like a confirmation, or you ask the customer to confirm. Anyway, I'm wondering how you get to the presumption that they have already opted out. Is it a data confirmation, or is it a logic presumption? And then wouldn't it just be safe to just have a confirming question?
So this is Jeff Trout for Potomac Edison, and I think both of those are really good questions, Lori. As a practical matter, after the CCA is up and running, the only customers who will be on SOS are the customers who have opted out of the CCA. So you can do this, and you should do it through a default. But then you get your second question, which is, should there be in the script of the utility when they get the new service request to ask that follow-up question? The utility doesn't want to be depriving anybody of their option to affirmatively opt into the CCA, or for that matter, another retail supplier when they've been on SOS. So that is one of the areas where we will do, and here I speak only for Potomac Edison, but again, I have difficulty imagining the answer would be different for either of the other utilities. We will do anything reasonable that the county proposes. If the county said that they wanted a question like that, we can implement it. If the county wants to do what I had understood it to want to do, which is to control the communications with the customers rather than relying on the utility to control them, then that's when you get into the universe of Mr. Hoppeck's question of 30 or 40 minutes ago, which was, is the county going to get a list of people who have moved, staying on SOS, so that the county can reach out to them and say, you sure you don't want to try the CCA again? So we can do it either of those ways, or we can do it some third way if it's reasonable and it's what the county wants to do. So.
Thank you, Jeff. Lisa Brennan has her hand raised.
Thank you. I just wanted to follow up on something that Bill Fields asked. Did I understand correctly that Bill was suggesting that under the statute, if a customer moves from a house in PE or BGE territory in Montgomery County to Pepco territory, for example, if they've already opted out and chosen SOS, so then would be on SOS, that would also get transferred? Because I'm trying to figure out if the utilities would know that. How would the utilities communicate that amongst themselves?
Lisa, that's a good, this is Jeff again. That's a good question. I do not know the answer to that question. I do not know whether if we get a customer who moves into our service territory, whether we know from somewhere else in Maryland, whether we know what their supply option was in that in that previous utilities service territory.
Yeah,
Hey, this is Ashish from BG&E. I think that's exactly why the CCA probably needs to be the ones that track, right, who is opted out. They're going to be the ones that initially, at the initial startup of the CCA, send out notifications, right, and asking for whether the customer wants to participate or not. And as this program progresses, they're probably going to be the ones in the best position to identify as customers move within their county, right? Whether it's inside the utility service territory or outside the utility service territory. The utility won't be able to know.
And I think the county would want to contact customers that move within or between utility territories within the county, because the rates could be different. So we would want them to reevaluate that decision that they may have made.
Am I correct in saying that the way this works currently is that the one utility doesn't have any contact with another utility? So in that case, that customer would just be simply a new customer. And so it would revert back to under the one option, sending it to the county to have that notice conversation with the customer.
Correct. I mean, if the CCA is tracking it, right, there could be the option where whether they want to reach out to that customer or not, that's up to them.
Yeah, but I think that's right. We would want to get for them to be treated like a new customer that we would get information from and reach out to.
Okay, so they wouldn't default to they would default to the CCA.
Yeah.
Correct.
Okay, so that's not is that what Bill said? Bill, were you reading that statute different?
Well, I think he was talking about within the same service territory within Montgomery County.
Well, no, actually this is Bill. What I was pointing out was the law said, I mean, G3 says that the customer is deemed to have chosen the CCA unless the customer has contacted an electric company to select standard offer service. So when I read that, I'm thinking if the customer contacted one of the electric companies, then they've made that selection. But that, like I said, that raises the question of how you figure that out. How you get that information. Asking the customer upon new service seems like a possibility to me, to try to just figure out what they want to do if they even have an opinion.
I guess I'm trying to figure out from a practical matter how that would possibly work if the utilities don't communicate. First of all, I'm not sure that's what was intended. I mean, the contracted with a retail supplier makes sense, but just if they have contracted with another utility and opted out so they had SOS, a new utility wouldn't know that. And I'm just not sure how that would be expected to be known. I think we had talked originally about if a customer moves into PE territory and calls Potomac Edison and says, I want SOS, versus telling the CCA or anybody else. So I think that's what we had talked. That's what I recall talking about earlier. Is if somebody actually calls the utility and says, "Hey, BGE, I want SOS."
Right. Well, yeah, that's certainly clear that then that customer should get put on SOS.
Right. So if I happen to sign up, I'm moving into the county. I've heard of this thing called CCA. I don't want to try it at this point. So when I call and sign up for service, I say, and sign me up for SOS. That's how I had originally read that. Not if I was moving from like PE territory to PEPCO territory and had SOS in one, I would automatically get SOS in the other.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think that would be, I don't know why anybody would think that was really how the data would work.
Well, I mean, legislators might think that the utilities could, create a common list of customers who had opted out and, deal with it that way. I mean, I'm not saying I'm not saying I feel really strongly about this as a policy matter. It's just when I read the language, that's what it says to me.
Sorry. So the way I was thinking about it, right, is that under the PE Montgomery County proposal, right, if the utilities are creating a list of new customers, providing them on the FTP site, if a customer goes from PEPCO service territory to BGE territory, you're right, they are a new customer for BGE. They would show up on that FTP site, right? and on that customer list, if the CCA at that point, when they look at that list, determines that they were a Pepco customer in the past and they had affirmatively opted out of the CCA and wanted to remain on SOS, they don't have to send an enrollment transaction for that customer. And they don't have to, unless they, I know the county wanted to maybe reach out to those customers, but they don't have to reach out to those customers. They've effectively made a choice, right? So if the CCA is tracking these opt-out lists, right, because they're going to have to create one initially. And so, I mean, that's potentially a way that could work.
Bill Vanderhayden, your hand is raised.
Yeah, I just kind of want to ask, it's like a practical question. So there's no discussion of time here. So if somebody opts out in October 24, and then like next year, let's say, maybe even 6 or 8 months later, past the next SOS price, change, why would one assume that they would want to stay with SOS without knowing what the prices were? So if we're sort of, and maybe I'm hearing this wrong, but I think maybe folks are making some kind of assumption that if a customer, hearing the disclosure that they get in like, September of 24 and says, oh, well, the CCA is a little bit higher price, so I'll stick with SOS. And then like forevermore, they will never be defaulted to the CCA if they move within the county based on that. That sort of takes away from them the ability to make that choice again with updated pricing information. And I
No, absolutely not. They every minute of every day, they have the option to shop, including to go to the CCA. So your scenario is the only way a person gets on the CCA is if they get defaulted to it, not if they affirmatively elect. And I'm assuming the county is going to design a CCA that is attractive and that will get and retain customers on its own merits.
I guess what I'm asking is, the way the discussion was going, there seems to be this kind of permanent determination that like, I never want to be on SOS. So it's like the whole point of this law is to replace the default service in Montgomery County with the CCA. And if it seems impractical to not have some kind of a system whereby if a customer's made that decision at some point, there's kind of a reset, because it's still,
I was just answering Bill's question, right? Or just trying to figure out a mechanism by which that could work across utilities. It's really up to the CCA whether they want to reach out and when they want to reach out, right, to a customer.
But the practical effect that I'm trying to address maybe is that you're saying if the customers it's almost like they get on a list that says, I don't want to be on the CCA. They have made that decision at some point in time when that, the price affected that, but we're going to carry that forward. And so the default nature of the CCA sort of disappears after that initial decision based on what you're saying. And Bill, I see you parsing the language there, and you're the attorney. So, but it seems impractical that someone would make a decision about the CCA under another set of SOS rates in a different service territory, and that we would somehow want to apply this law that said, well, we assume they want to keep that choice, even though the new rates are entirely different. So,
Bill, are you saying that so every time we have a SOS auction and our rates change, we have to go
no, Beth,
and
I'm
reset
saying
everything?
every time they move to a new location, it might be entirely practical to treat that as if they have the opportunity to default to the CCA, because that's what would happen. But I think what you're saying is once they make that initial decision, they'll never default to the CCA, even if they move. And Bill's suggesting maybe even if they move, in different service territories. But it just seems like perhaps it sort of weakens the intent, because they'll have made that choice once, and default service is is a pretty big, something that affects the way customers are on electricity. So if you're sort of removing that default functionality after they make that initial, I guess it just seems like it's sort of weakening the intent of what this law was.
But
So
what
Phil,
is
you're
it
saying
about
that, I'm sorry, go
making-
ahead, Bev.
Well, no, I guess I'm just struggling why, somebody moving is a trigger for, kind of redefaulting them potentially. If you're going to do that, then you should just have, the law should have said, every 3 years you
Well, it says on applying for new service, and everybody said that a new account number means new service. So I'm just trying to understand the practical implication here. I mean, I'm not suggesting that every time your SOS rate changes, they default back to the CCA. I'm suggesting that if they actually up and move to a new location, the language is saying new electric service. So, and maybe, where I'm sort of running into the logic problems between, 1 and 2 is that it seems like they have made a decision to stay on SOS at some point in time. And then that default nature of what we're trying to do with this pilot then sort of ends. And they never ever make that, they never ever, that decision holds them forever.
And this is
was-
Kenny. I'm sorry, Your Honor.
Go ahead, Kenny.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, I mean, Phil's point, I mean, the SOS prices, as we know, differ significantly between the utilities. And we know that customers who are going to be making opt-out opt-out choices, are people who are probably following the rates and looking at the prices, most specifically the SOS price and what they see from the CCA and possibly from suppliers. So I think Phil's, I like that idea that if you're moving into a different utilities service territory, that SOS option you made earlier for utility number 1 shouldn't carry over to utility number 2 in the new service area. I mean, that is the point, as Phil's saying, that customers get to make the choice of who they want supplying the power.
Well, this is Bill Fields again. I mean, I understand what you're saying on a policy basis, and what Kenny just said, but we have to, if that's going to be the decision, we have to have a way of reading the statute that corresponds to that. I'm not seeing it. So I mean, I don't think we should. I don't think we should get totally bogged down in this discussion. But if that's going to be the decision, then there's got to be a way to read the statute that conforms with that, and I have a hard time seeing it. But it's not the biggest issue we have to deal with here.
I agree with you, Bill. We're talking about a very, very, very small subset of folks. And furthermore, this statute you default to the CCA unless you make you take an affirmative action. You affirmatively say, no, I want SOS, or you affirmatively say, no, I want, a retail supplier. To have to take that action every single time you move is a little bit excessive. The way things work now, what we're saying is that the utilities don't talk to each other. So this will be a new customer. So it will go to Montgomery County. Montgomery County will have the ability to make the decision of notification, of giving options, the same way they do any new customer. So the person who is a new customer, but not a new customer, will be given a second chance to be educated if that's what the county decides. Will be, or if the county decides that one opt-out is sufficient, then the county may not contact them. So, and it's also possible that these folks will, if they have already opted out and selected SOS the first time, they may do that when they first call the new utility. So let's try not to get bogged down in this. I see, Stan, you have your hand raised, but go ahead.
Yeah, just quickly, I agree this is a minor point, and I would just, to Bill Field's point about reading the statute, I would suggest that standard offer service is different for each electric company. So when you say an electric company to select standard offer service, that's the standard offer service from that electric company, which is different than the standard offer service from another electric company. So I think that's how you can read the statute that says that they're essentially a new customer.
Well, we can all think about that. It's a little strained, but maybe it works.
Okay, David Hoppick, I think you had another question or two that you wanted
Yes.
to discuss.
Yes, thank you. So the second question, and it's two parts, and I'll start with the first part first, is under the PE Montgomery County proposal, one of the things that is specifically in the PE cost benefit spreadsheet is the last in enrollment. And this is also something we address in our pros and cons. So under that, if on the same day a third-party supplier submits an enrollment, but later that day the CCA submits an enrollment, the CCA enrollment would be the one that goes forward. And if a third-party supplier submits something, say, 2 days before for enrollment, and then 2 days later the CCA submits an enrollment, the CCA enrollment would go forward under the quote-unquote PE Montgomery County proposal. But that also means that a customer who has made an affirmative decision to select their third-party supplier would not receive that third-party supplier. So earlier, Montgomery County, and please correct me if I'm wrong, indicated that if a customer enrolls with a third-party supplier, they do want that to prevail. And one group we haven't heard respond on this issue are the suppliers themselves. So I'd like to start with that question.
Yeah, I mean, this is Stan. I'll reiterate that according to the statute, the person that selects a third-party supplier should stay on that third-party supplier. And my understanding was that the utilities would be able, when they send information to the CCA, would say, here's a customer, but they've chosen a third-party supplier, and therefore we would not submit a change request to them, for them, an EDI request to change it.
So following up on that, though, Stan, I think there will be circumstances where you, unless the FTP is updated very frequently, and for customers who are already new customers, you would not know that, right? Because a new customer moves from outside of Montgomery County, outside of the utility, to Montgomery County. The utility is going to think, my understanding, when they post to the FTP, this is a new customer, they're starting off on SOS, here's how you can enroll them. But then, depending on timing, the third-party supplier may submit an enrollment before your enrollment.
Yeah, and then,
so I think there's circumstances where you wouldn't know it.
Okay, and I guess I understood that the utilities would also, they would have that record that they're on a third-party supplier. And so therefore they would deny the EDI from the county, saying, putting them on the CCA. And maybe I misunderstood that, but I thought that was we were told that that could be done.
So looking at the cost benefits from PE, it says do not, my understanding is it says we do not want to change the last in rule. And that was my understanding from the earlier conversation. So can Jeff, the utilities, respond on that issue?
Yes, we do not want to change the last in rule. And I don't think it's an issue for the reasons that Stan just articulated.
So you don't think there would be certain circumstances where the third-party supplier would be overridden because the county doesn't know that that customer has selected a third-party supplier? Is that
So I
how
think that in the world we live in today with retail choice, that it is possible to have a customer enroll with two different suppliers, and this one of the suppliers, the supplier who enrolled got the first enrollment is slow and is the last one to send us back signing up. And so the way the first in rule the last in rule would work in that scenario is that the customer's second choice, later choice, doesn't in fact get honored because of a delay in the process. And that's the same redheaded stepchild scenario that you're envisioning. And I think we just fixed that on a customer by customer basis, which is how we fix it now.
Okay. And then related to that.
Hang on a second, Dave, hang on a second. Lori McGilvray?
Yes. So I guess I'm going to, how do you mitigate any of these cons under the PEMC enrollment process? But I agree that it seems like there is a solution on a customer by customer basis, that if, either because there's a conversation, and just as you would have the script say, just want to confirm you want to remain on SOS, if there's a conversation between the county supplier and a customer, they say, we just want to confirm that you have not signed a contract with any other third-party supplier, or if there is a confirmation communication that goes out, thank you, you've just signed up for the CCA. If you've been enrolled in error because you have has selected a third-party supplier, please contact us. It just seems like there's a way to deal with the glitches, the few glitches, on a case-by-case basis.
Okay, thank you. David Hoppick.
Yeah, so the follow-up part of this was, and Phil was getting at this earlier when he asked the county about their timelines. Is this problem less likely to raise? Is the red-headed stepchild less likely to appear if there's something saying, okay, well, within 24 hours, some period of time after we the utility post to the FTP that the county does enroll a customer it should enroll, because it makes it less likely for the red-headed stepchild to appear.
Can you say that again?
Sure. So if, we do have this situation where we have to fix on a customer basis situation where the third-party supplier's enrollment is overruled by the CCA because the CCA enrolls after the third-party supplier. Is there a potential workaround if the county is required or agrees to, within a period of time, like same day, maybe the next day, submit an enrollment after it gets the information from the FTP site, because the sooner they enroll, it makes it more likely that a subsequent enrollment by a supplier would happen after the CCA enrollment, and thus there'd be less need to fix this issue on a customer by customer basis. Are there thoughts on the viability of that?
Couldn't there also be an advantage to the county not acting quickly so that the information we were able to get from the utility included information that this was a retail customer and therefore don't enroll them in the CCA?
I think that only works if after the initial FTP posting, for that particular customer, it's immediately updated as soon as the utility knows another enrollment has come in. So I think,
I would think that could occur, couldn't it? I mean, if they have an account number, the CCA would take the latest information about that account number.
so I think this is a question for the utilities then.
I'm sorry, David, could you repeat your question, your scenario?
Sure. So, well, the scenario we're trying to fix is the same scenario as before, whereby a third-party supplier enrolls before the CCA, and the CCA doesn't know about the third-party supplier. So they go ahead and submit an enrollment, and then, Jeff said this will be fixed on a customer by customer basis. My suggestion was, is there a potential fix whereby the county agrees or is told it needs to enroll customers on a very rapid basis? So within, say, 24 hours of a new customer being posted to the FTP, they're required to submit an enrollment because it makes it more likely that they would be the first enrollment. Stan's response was, well, what if we actually wait and then we are updated? So the question for that to happen, what would need to happen is a new customer moves to PE. PE posts the information to the FTP site. Let's say a day later, that customer signs up with a supplier enrolls that customer, or 3 days later. Immediately upon receiving that enrollment, that original FTP posting is updated. So that's how Stan's kind of fix works. Is that something that's doable, workable? What is the utility's reaction to kind of updating an FTP for a new customer as soon as they know an enrollment has come in?
It sounds feasible. This is Jeff. It sounds feasible to me. The other solution is to have the county reach out. And again, it's really how much control the county wants to have over the communications. But it sounds feasible to me. Apparent, I'm getting an instant message that says it wouldn't be any different from what we do now. So that's good, because that was the whole goal of our model, was to invent as little new as possible. So yay. Okay, so that is this solution from our perspective, or a solution from our perspective, David, and there might be other ones that we could make work too, but that one does work.
All right, thank you. Do PHI and BG have a thought on that?
Yeah, this is Robbie. Not really, but I guess it just depends upon, how frequently you all, the list is to be generated, would dictate what. I'm just trying to figure out how we could populate the list after the customer has already moved in, if that makes sense, and then populate it again if they enroll with a third-party supplier. I don't know how that would work.
Well, I think that's Stan's solution. Is they move in, you post to the FTP site,
right?
You get a new enrollment for that customer, you update that post to the FTP site, or maybe you submit, there's a new post to the FTP site, and the county either needs to figure out, okay, it's the same account number, so we need to kind of ignore the earlier post, or it updates the earlier post. But that's the Stan solution.
Yeah, and I guess the issue is what would trigger them to go back to the list, because then at that point it wouldn't be a new customer coming in.
Yeah, we've already submitted.
Yeah,
that-
I mean, it's-
that
yeah.
customer, right, to the
Right.
CCA at that point.
So they're not new if they enroll with a third-party supplier. So
Yeah.
it wouldn't get put on the list at that point.
Yeah.
They passed that point.
I mean,
Yeah, but
spitballing here, right? But one option could be that the utility during that initial sign-up process potentially instruct the customer not to enroll with third-party supply for a certain amount of time, right? To allow the CCA to send in enrollment to kind of alleviate some of this as well.
Yeah, I think that's an option in the opposite direction of what I understand to be Stan's solution. But yeah, I mean, you would have to update the FTP site not only when there's a new customer, but when there's also new information about that customer, because otherwise the CCA will not know that that customer has enrolled with a third party supplier.
It does seem to me that this is kind of a detail of the posting to the FTP site that, at least when Jeff and I talked, that we need to work out, but is not, I don't think it's insurmountable. That.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's more of a, you have to work out the timing and on some of these things, but it's certainly, it can be done.
Yeah, well, I would think that so you get a new customer, you post that to the FTP site, you get a customer that signs up for retail supplier, there's some trigger that says also post this account to the FTP site. And I would think that would not be an issue, but again, we need to talk more about that. But
there are multiple ways to. First of all, this is a very small problem, and secondly, there are multiple ways to solve the problem to the satisfaction of the county and anyone else who is concerned about it. And we have time later to work out which of those solutions people want to adopt.
Yeah.
And third, it doesn't move, none of this moves the needle. From my perspective, none of this moves the needle at all on the issue that we continue to debate about, which is what to do with the move-in customers.
Yeah. The county is not concerned about this. I believe we can work this out.
All right, thank you.
Opening this up to others now, looking at the 3 different options here and what the pros and cons have been listed by the submission from PE and also from staff. Does anybody else have any questions? All right.
Sorry, Judge. Can I just ask one follow-up?
Yes, ma'am.
Is it possible, just so I'm clear, is it possible for BGE and PEPCO just to confirm, if not right now, just at some point before the next meeting, maybe, that they are in alignment with the pros and cons listed by Potomac Edison on their spreadsheet? Because my understanding of the data request response to staff is that it didn't really get into the pros and cons like what's in Potomac Edison's reply to our data request. So I understand what you were saying about the costs, but there were some other issues, and I just want to make sure there was no difference in how BGE or PEPCO were operating from Potomac Edison.
Speaking for BG, I think we're in alignment with PE, right? Their pros and cons, albeit our costs are going to be different. And I think we discussed that earlier in the call. If you need something specifically in writing, we can probably provide that.
Same for PHI.
Maybe could you just edit Potomac Edison's spreadsheet and just say,
Sure.
BGE also, or
Yep.
I don't know, whatever's. I'm not trying to make you reinvent the wheel by any stretch, but I think it would be helpful for all of us to have all that information in one spot. especially when we're getting into details like whether last in enrollment is, applicable or things like that. Thank you.
Bill, do you have any further comments?
Judge Grace, was that for me? I didn't.
Sorry, I've muted myself and I'm trying to use the space bar. So if it cut off the beginning, yeah. Phil, do you have any other questions?
At this point, no, other than I think we had raised a couple. You had asked earlier on in the, and I don't, I want to check with Dave to make sure he got through everything he needed to cover. But you had raised a question about what folks might need in order to make a decision about which of these options, and kind of breaking down the costs and benefits. So are we going to, is it the intent to sort of pursue that and have specific costs as they would, be reflected for each of these methods? Or are we sort of forestalled from doing any further investigation into that?
I believe that the utilities have provided information about cost to the specificity necessary for this discussion.
And you're acknowledging that they have not provided costs other than a comparison to the seamless move costs?
They have provided a cost estimate based on the amount of hours they need to code something into their new system.
Okay, and just to clarify, the answers to the questions were specific to the seamless move. So I guess it's fair for us to assume that the cost for this development is consistent with that for developing seamless move. I'm just asking because I think ultimately we're going to want to know and be able to communicate to the county precisely what each of these methods would cost their constituents.
To be clear.
Well, what are you, first of all, I think you and Bev earlier had a disagreement on the comparison to seamless move. Second of all, on what basis are you going to put 100% of the cost recovery to Montgomery County, or how are you allocating that cost recovery?
Yeah, I think the way we typically break down costs for things does involve allocation, to various types of groups. And it also involves an understanding of what kinds of costs. So the way the costs are being accounted for is also important. So it sounds like we'll have to sort of make some assumptions about that based on what we have thus far. I think what we simply were trying to get to is like, if we're asking for some specific functionality and we want to understand what that would cost, I think we have a very ballpark number, which, maybe that's all we're going to get. And that's, we could try to figure that out. But we have been given some information that there are components of the different work that was done. And I think it's fair to look at that and try to understand how those costs are being recovered such that it makes sense, the way these would be recovered in a rate case or in consideration of, POR rates or something. So that's, I think, ultimately to make the choice of which of these options, we need to understand, what does it cost and who's going to pay for it and how's it going to get collected? So I think we want to get to that so that we can, make a recommendation of which of these options. So that's kind of what I thought we were going with. And there may be some factual disagreements about what's been provided. It's not typical that when you ask for information, you don't have the opportunity to ask some questions about what's in there. But it's your call, Judge, how you want to do that. I understand you want to get moving, and we respect that and agree that we don't want to spend too much time. But I do want to make sure that we're making this choice with all of the information that we need to do it. That's all.
Jeff Trout, you have your hand raised?
Yes, Your Honor, I just want to reiterate so that it's absolutely clear to everyone that when we provided information about the costs of seamless moves, we being Potomac Edison, in response to staff's data requests, that was because staff's data request asked about the cost of seamless moves, not the cost of any of these options. And then when the county asked, what are the costs of these three options? We, Potomac Edison, provided costs for estimates for each of these three options. And then we participated, and I apologize because I literally have lost track of how many side meetings staff has called with the utilities and others about this same set of issues, but we had either 2 or 3 side meetings, and we provided additional information before and during the side meetings where we amplified where our estimates came from and how they were put together. Not to put too fine a point on it, Mr. Vanderhayden conducted what amounted to multi-hour depositions of my subject matter experts in these side meetings on these issues. And whether apparently he is not satisfied with the answers that he got, but they are the answers that he got. We have given cost estimates for these 3 options. We have also separately given, in response to a staff question about seamless moves, cost that we have incurred with respect to seamless moves. There are a lot of similarities between those cost estimates because they're all major science projects, except for the minimal change, minimal cost option that Potomac Edison and the county proposed a number of weeks ago.
Phil?
Thank you, Judge. Jeff, I just want to point out, and I appreciate all the responses, but I mean, some of your answers are not precise at all. I mean, your development time for the mirror approach is listed as massive, which is not at all helpful in terms of helping us understand, how these numbers are being developed and whether or not we understand everything's in there. So, we have tried to take this as seriously as possible, and I appreciate the time that your subject matter experts, took to help us understand. But I think what we're doing is entirely reasonable because this is a very complicated thing we're trying to figure out. And there are costs, and I think we are doing our best to work out whether or not it's cost effective to take some of these approaches based on what we know. So right now, we do not have information from all of the companies. Jeff, you have provided a cost estimate at a fairly high level. And I think we're going to want at least that same information from the other utilities. I mean, if we're asked to choose one of the options based on your assertion that your proposal is almost no cost or low cost, regardless of any of the other concerns about how it's going to work, then that's something that I think we'd want to think about for a little while as to whether or not we agree that that's the best approach. I think we understand that while there are costs that are on the same scale as what other types of system development has cost, we also understand that we are dealing with the ability to recover that over the SOS or the CCA revenue stream over a long enough period of time to make it an affordable option if it provides the options and the features of this program the way that is optimal for everyone involved, including the customers, and as close as possible to implementing the law the way it's written. So, apologize if it's taking this sort of investigation into it, but you mentioned that I was conducting a deposition. It did feel like I was trying to ask questions, groping around in the dark, but I'm doing the best that I can in order to try to acquire the information, and I think we need to make our decision. So yes, it's taken some time, but these are not simple matters, and I don't think it's reasonable to expect that we would be able to go right to what we need you to do without this level of inquiry. So to follow up, Judge Grace, we have some level of information. It's really not what you would do if you were attempting to, identify the appropriate recovery of costs that were spent. We're being asked to identify which of the methods we think is optimal. And I guess if this is what we're going to get, we'll attempt to make that decision as best we can with the information we have.
Jeff Trout, you have your hand raised.
Yes, Your Honor, are you able to flip back up the pros and cons chart that Potomac Edison supplied? Because there were a number of different things that we responded to, and I thought one of the rows in the chart was hours, development hours.
I believe it is. Hang on just a second. These dang little boxes. There you go.
Yeah. Okay, so 40 hours, 4,600 hours, and 8,000 hours, and the final summary above that of costs. I apologize. Give me just a second here. Sorry, my grandson was very enthusiastic about participating. So the reason why you have minimal million plus and substantially over $1 million in row 14 is explained in 16 and elsewhere. So we did provide a lot of information. And then we got cross-questioned about that information in the meetings that did not include the full working group. And we are today where we are today.
Okay. The staff and others need as much detailed information as they can to choose which option they're supporting. In any proceeding, there is a limited amount of time for data requests and responses, and for each issue. And the utilities only have so much time to respond to these questions. So I'm about to lay out a procedural schedule for the next couple of weeks. Everybody get a pencil ready. And I'm sorry, but nobody's going to be happy. So here we go. Today is April 26th, Tuesday. Tomorrow is Wednesday, April 27th. By the close of business tomorrow, staff should send out a new email. I'm going to send out the email list that I've been working off of, and feel free to let me know if there's any errors. But go ahead and cut and paste and put it into your email. Send out a new email with DRs dated tomorrow with specific DRs. This is your last bite at the apple. By Friday, May 6th, the utilities are to respond to those data requests as best as possible. Jeff, it sounds like you already have the answers, just not in writing. You may need to meet, but that gives the utilities plenty of time to try to come up with the answers to these data responses as best as possible. On Monday, then, the 9th, May 9th, everyone can meet internally to take a look at what they have, come up with any questions they have, and try to discuss and come up with what position you have. Montgomery County, if you have questions, you can also send them out tomorrow by close of business, April 27th, and any other party. And then we're going to meet again on Tuesday, May 10th. That is going to be the last day that we're going to be meeting on this issue. And I will be looking for everyone to give an opinion. If you don't have an opinion, that's fine. You don't have to answer, but I will be turning to each party to decide by that date where you stand on this issue so that it can go into the report to the commission. If we have a consensus, great. If we don't, that's fine. We'll just make sure we note carefully what each person's position is. If you have comments that you need to make on your position, you need to send those in writing prior to the meeting on Tuesday, May 10th. That way I can accurately put your comments into the report. We need to start talking about, I know it's 3:20, I get it. But we need to start talking about what our schedule is through the end, through the start of the CCA. So staff, in addition to the questions by tomorrow, very sorry for the short timeline, folks. By this Friday, April 29th, I'm going to be looking to staff to provide a schedule of the issues that are remaining, how many meetings you think are appropriate for those subject matters, all the way through regulations and submission to the commission. You've done one of those before, so I think you can start with that and it won't be recreating the wheel. And I would like that to go to everyone. Again, I'll be sending out the email list. And if you have comments on that, feel free to reply all. Are there any questions? Okay, great. Everyone check your calendars. We are probably going to be moving to full day meetings for this working group. We have gotten stuck on a few issues. And I know that there was a lot in the beginning, there was a lot of basics that we needed to go through to get everybody on the same page. But we have gotten mired down in some very small issues, and I'm concerned that we do not have enough time prior to having to have a whole lot more issues worked out and get it before the commission. So when you're looking at I'm not going to say that we're going to be in a full day meeting on the 5th. Was it the 5th? The 10th, May 10th. But after that, we will likely be going to full day meetings, meaning this will be starting at 10 o'clock. So keep that in mind when you're looking at your schedule. I'm not at this point going to go to every week meetings, but it's a suggestion that we can consider in the future based on how we proceed going forward. So right now we're still going to be at every other week. Next meeting is still going to be a half day meeting, but after that, we're likely going to go to full day meetings starting at 10 every other Tuesday. Any questions? Okay, is there anything else that we need to take up before we close for the day? All right, I think we had a great discussion. I think people raised some really good specific issues. I've tried to make note of them as best I can so that we can revisit them in the future. And thank you everyone for your hard work. I'm sorry about the hard work that I'm about to make you do in the next couple of weeks, but hopefully we'll be able to stay more on schedule in the future. Thank you very much.